so what I find it interesting is every single day, and the medium, this meeting is a message. That's a takeoff on Marshall McLuhan's famous statement that the media is the message. And so what he's saying is what you see is happening before your eyes. I believe that was the greatest illuminist statement that's been so plain for all to see. And the fact that, here's what I think we've got to make it clear, that obviously that Satan knows the latitude that God's given to him, and it's going to play out. But God has warned his people. And, Tom, I'll tell you what, sends goosebumps through my body right now. I know what happens when events of this magnitude take place, and I know that the dominoes, okay, the dominoes that have hidden evil, the dominoes that have kept evil out of our dimension are down. The gates are open. The stargates are opening. And for the record, just as Tim found out, all over the world, the universal symbol for stargates is a spiral. It didn't matter if they were in Sardinia. It didn't matter if they were in Rome. It didn't matter if they were in Malta. It didn't matter if they were in Peru, Bolivia. The universal symbol for stargates is the spiral. The Native Americans that contact me, they're saying there's a lot of events happening. There's a lot of gates opening. And what I think is fascinating, the ancients understood one thing, and I don't know how it all works, but they knew that when the volcanoes started going off, that the evil spirits that were, if you will, held in abeyance for this specific time would be released. And whether it's Popo in Mexico City or it's, Simbayang or Reventador, any of the bigger volcanoes, Mount Etna, Vesuvius is probably next, but all of these are going up. And, Tom, you cannot separate them from the legends of the fallen angels. Now, here's what I find that's fascinating. We're watching, if you will, the whole Earth, E-A-R-T-H, convulse. We're watching the birth pangs, and I don't think people are going to like what's being born on this earth. I don't think, and I'm talking about the evil that's coming. But in your book, you detail such a specific series of events that have been laid out thousands of years before. And isn't it interesting? People should realize this. The preeminent Sibyl in the Sistine Chapel represented is the Kumeyaun Sibyl. Is that not true?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, let's talk about that a little bit. But let me follow up with one final statement about what I had said a moment ago. That these prophecies of the Kume Sibyl that came down, they were borrowed by other Sibyls. They were repeated by even early church fathers. That resulted in the coming of the great end times monarch, this leader of a final world system. I believe that what the Catholics have done is that they have taken the prophecies of the Kume Sibyl, and in a way they've reversed them to set themselves up for great deception. Why would I say that? Because they believe that there's a coming great socialist dictator, so does Francis evidently, who's going to work with this final pope, and he's going to be their temporary savior, and that the Antichrist is not going to appear until after the final emperor. But I believe that's the exact opposite of what the book of Revelation teaches, that the great monarch, the great emperor, is going to be the Antichrist working with a false prophet according to the book of Revelation, and it's not until after that the second coming of Jesus Christ occurs. The ISIS Islamists are also deceived because they too plagiarized the Kume Sibyl's prophecy to point to their coming Mahdi, and so in the same way they're going to accept the Savior. In fact, we have a chapter in our book on the final Roman emperor, how Muslims, Jews, and Christians are all going to be deceived by the coming of the final Roman emperor, are going to accept Antichrist as their Savior. Well, of course, the book of Revelation makes that point too. But I believe that all all three, the Jews, the Christians and Catholics, and the Muslims, are going to accept this false prophet, which is going to be the Antichrist. So the connection of the ancient Sibyls, the prophetess of the god Apollo, Osiris, Nimrod, is literally extraordinary in light of her reverential place that you mentioned a moment ago in the Sistine Chapel and on the Great Seal of the United States of America. Now, is this just Tom Horn and Chris Putnam and Steve Quayle being evangelicals and therefore like the Protestants of the turn of the century, and we're taking a shot at Catholicism to accuse them of being the Antichrist and whatever? What an awful lot of Catholics might not know is that is exactly the belief system of many of the early Catholic theologians. Many early Catholic theologians and many of their most celebrated visions, Marian apparitions, including La Salette, pointed to how the day would come in which Rome would become apostate, and Rome would actually become the seat of the Antichrist and lead the world in the misdirection. There is highly placed church experts, even in recent years, that have asserted that there is Satan worship that is very real, very powerful, that is occurring inside the Leonine walls of the Holy See in order to establish the coming of Antichrist in the place of Christ, or in the place, the Antichrist as the celebrated final Roman emperor, the great monarch. By the way, for instance, if Catholics listen to this show want to Google some of this to make sure that I'm not just making this up, Google Monsignor Luigi Martinelli, who about 15 years ago wrote a book called Gone with the Wind in the Vatican, sold 100,000 copies in just the first 3 weeks, and look at what it discusses. Satanism being practiced by the highest cardinals at the Vatican. There's an exorcist you can Google, Archbishop Emmanuel Milongo. He actually spoke at the Fatima 2000 celebration when the vision of Fatima was allegedly released at the International Conference on World Peace, and he charged high-ranking members of the church hierarchy as being in league with Satan, he said, and that they too were working to try to mislead the Catholic faithful into the acceptance of the final Roman emperor as a messianic-like figure that's going to lead this new world order, if you will, but that in fact they would be deceived into accepting the Antichrist. Of course, Malachi Martin, the Pontifical Biblical Institute writer that we've talked about so many times, at the time that Emmanuel Milongo, the Archbishop, said what he did at Our Lady of Fatima 2000, the Manhattan magazine, The Fatiman Crusader, they asked Martin, because of some public alarm that was raised about what Milongo was saying about high-ranking Vatican officials who were followers of Satan, they asked him about it, and Martin said anybody who's acquainted with the state of affairs in the Vatican in the last 35 years is well aware that the princes of darkness have had and continue to have their surrogates in the court of St. Peter in Rome. So this is something that for modern Catholics comes as a real surprise. They don't have any idea that some of their recent theologians, as well as some of the ancient theologians, agreed, and some of their venerated Marian apparitions, that Rome would become the seat of the Antichrist and lead the world into deception based on this final Roman emperor, this final monarch prophecy. It's a real surprise. Most modern Catholics today, I talk to them all the time. They're absolutely astonished. They can't believe it when I tell them, look, some of the early church fathers of the Roman Catholic Church, some of the most celebrated of their theologians, said that at the end of time, the Vatican would become the seat of the Antichrist. They are astonished by that, but it's actually a pretty common eschatology among high-level Catholic scholars. Men like here's some more names to Google: Cardinal Henry Manning, Bishop Salvador Zola, Frederick William Pele. These are extraordinary names in Catholic history, and all of them saw that in the last days a demonically infested clergy at the highest levels in Rome would subvert and use the papacy as a political vehicle for an occult world order. And that's, of course, what Malachi Martin wrote so much of his books and material about. And by the way, 10 years before Malachi said something pulled his feet out from under him while he was preparing for an exorcism, and he later died, he was working on a book at that time. And he said it was going to be his most explosive book ever. The title of it was going to be called Primacy: How the Institutional Roman Catholic Church Became a Creature of the New World Order. And at that time, if you recall, he was very outspoken about pedophilic Satanism at the heart of the Vatican, throughout the College of Cardinals, all the way down to the local parishes. He said they were in league with a secret diabolicus that began following what he called an enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer in the Roman Catholic citadel in the 1960s. And I think we've talked about this before, so maybe we shouldn't go over it again, but he said there was a ritual to enthrone Lucifer as the Prince of Rome, and secondly, to assure that that inception happened, and that an immaterial spirit, the spirit of Lucifer, was embodied within a final pope. He even wrote the book, The Final Conclave. And here we are living in this very moment in time, right? And in that book,
absolutely,
in the Keys to His Blood, he said John Paul was scared. John Paul, he said, was terrified. He had come up against an irremovable presence in the Vatican that he called the super force. And they were working to make sure that the prophecy of the Cumae Sibyl, the final Roman emperor, this last monarch, that Catholics around the world would be deceived into accepting this individual as their temporary Messiah, as their leader and the final pope, but they would actually be embracing the Antichrist. Well, this has come full circle. This has come to fruition now. We're at the final pope, and he is behaving in such a way that it appears that he too sees himself in a role, because now he's out there doing, Steve, what you said you dreamt of or you had a vision of when you were a young preacher, that the day would come in which the Muslim faith and the Catholic faith would be united into this end-time super force that Malachi Martin said would cause the Vatican to become the seat of the Antichrist.